Hey guys, Danny Johnson here, and today I'm going to tell you about my first ever engine swap. And so this story goes back to when I had my 97 V6 Mustang, and my twin brother had one just like it. And we'd drive around and look at cars on car lots all the time. And there was one particular one that we saw once, and it was a 1996 Mustang GT. And this was the 248A package, meaning roll-up windows, no rear wing, no fog lights, that kind of thing. And so you can see here, this is the car, and the owner had put on a gray side stripe that said GT. He put on a different wing since it didn't come with one. And so at the dealership, it was a really cool car. 40 Series Flowmasters, sounded amazing. Well, flash forward a few years, the car came up for sale by some guy who bought it, and said it had a knocking noise in it. So we went up there about 45 minutes away from where we lived, and it would start up and it would go up onto the trailer, and it sounded awesome as our first V8. So, really cool car. We got it up onto the trailer, and then we're just thinking, okay, how are we going to fix this now? We picked it up for $700, which is, a steal, and it being the V8. So we got it home, and it was disgusting on the inside, just trashed. The guy didn't take good care of it at all. It was under a few layers of dust as well, and so we started cleaning it up little by little, getting all of his garbage out of there. And aside from that, the car had a lot of interesting character too. He had put 302 badges on the side, where this is a 4.6 liter, which is a 281. 302 would be a 5.0. So anyway, misbadged left and right all over it, and even up by the little intake it said SVO for Special Vehicle Operation, which was an SVT thing. So definitely misbadged all over the place. But the engine looked okay, other than the fact that it was knocking. We cleaned it up as best we could. There was also some other character on here. Does not play well with others. So just kind of weird stuff. But my friend came up. We pulled out the buffer. We went to town on the car and made it really look nice for what it was. And it shined up pretty good, other than where it was fading, but we made it look really nice for what it was. And first order of business, we took out those ugly Altezza taillights, and my cousin up in Salt Lake actually found a pair of the same exact color taillights for sale, because they have the border around them, if you're familiar with the 96 to 98, and put those in, and the car looked great. And so nice car. We were taking it slow as we could have time to kind of look at it and work on it, and cleaned it up. And it was so painful to have such a beautiful sounding 40 Series Flowmaster car with an H-pipe, and have it be knocking and not be able to do anything with it. So we kept looking things over, and one thing we found was someone had said on the online forums that the knocking could be from a collapsed valve lash adjuster. So being hopeful, we bought a few new valve lash adjusters and popped them out from underneath the cam lobes. And this car was pretty dirty underneath. I dropped one of them, and after I dug it out, you can see how disgusting this roller looks, down in there. So here's the valve lash adjuster here after that the rollers out of the way, and we started it up, and it threw a rod right through the block. So it must have been a spun bearing, actually, is what was wrong. And when we eventually tore the engine apart, it bent that connecting rod horribly. So we knew we needed a new engine, and took a fun little road trip down to Pahrump, Nevada, which is out in the middle of nowhere. It's past Las Vegas. And there was a firefighter guy who sounded like we could trust him. He seemed like a legitimate guy selling this 97 Mustang. So we grabbed and it was a GT. So we grabbed a car dolly and headed over to this guy's house. And when we got there, yeah, it looked okay. The car had been crashed in the front, but the engine was all there. And so he guaranteed that it ran. We never heard it run, but we put it up onto the car dolly. And as you know, with these, you have to get under and take off the drive shaft, or it'll burn up the transmission. And so we're towing it from the front on a car dolly, but we did take that drive shaft off to make sure that we didn't have any problems. Even though it was an automatic transmission car, but we didn't want to burn up the transmission because we might be able to sell it. So anyway, looked the car over, took it home, got back onto our way. And part of this is real fun, is just the road trips that you have with your friends and the experience. And it was a risk picking up a car that we didn't even know if it would run, but it said that it did. And so we got home. Like I said, this is an automatic transmission car, and so we began to take it apart. It did not have a steering wheel on it, so we were literally turning it with vice grips to get it lined up for the trailer. But it had a lot of nice pieces, which I actually envy now that I have this 98 Cobra project with the same saddle color interior. And so I wish I had a lot of these pieces back, but this was years ago, and that's just how life is. You never know what parts to keep. And so we had it under a cover for a minute until we could figure some things out, and then just went to town taking some of the interior pieces out. Some of it was trashed, but some of it was still salvageable. And I started selling some of these parts on eBay, and actually made just about, I think the guy sold us this car for like $300 as it was. So we were getting the engine out of it, and in the meantime, able to sell some of these old parts, and kind of made the money back to the point where we had a free engine. So it actually worked out pretty good. And we would even sell some of the older parts off of the current GT. As I'll show you later, we put some bullets on and made the car look really nice. But anyway, just parted it out as much as we could, and then the work began. So we put the cars head to head and looked everything over. And keep in mind, this is the first engine swap we'd ever attempted. So early one morning, we drove over to my brother's house where we had both cars, and you can see all four SN95s there, including our really nice V6 for what it was, really nice car. And so I just went to town, started to put the car up into the air and disconnect everything, and brought in the engine hoist. And this car was actually easier to pull because the front radiator support was gone. So the engine and transmission came right out the front of it. And once again, this is an automatic transmission. We had to do our research if it could work with a 5-speed car. We had a lot of variables, and hoping that the car ran. We turned the crankshaft, the breaker bar, and everything sounded like it was moving pretty good. And some of these old 2-valve 4.6s, they're tried and true. So anyway, we tried our luck with it and got pretty dirty, of course, and got that whole transmission and engine out at the same time, and had some fun along the way. Obviously, this is a pretty big accomplishment for us at this time. And so had the old engine, or had the new donor engine out and ready to go, and then it was on to our beautiful, look how good that car looks with the bullet wheels on it and everything. So it was time to put the engine in that one. So we took the donor engine and took it apart and cleaned it up the best that we could. We took off the oil pan, looked at the internals, cleaned them all out, made sure that everything was good. And everything was matching up pretty good. And so we decided this engine was going to be good for us, and it cleaned up really nice. We cleaned up the bottom gasket area where the oil pan goes real nice. Rotated it, flipped it all over, put new oil pan gaskets on it, new valve cover gaskets, used a paint type adhesive here. It was a gasket maker that was pretty good, but got everything back together, and decided we were gonna give it a go. So we were now ready to start working on getting the engine out of the other car, the 96. And here's the automatic transmission, which nobody was really interested in buying it. We had it for sale for a long time, but anyway, now it's time to move on to the 96 GT. So we put it up in the air and basically repeated the same process. Started draining out all the coolant, disconnecting everything from underneath the car, and by now we actually had a pretty good idea, since the other car we had taken apart. We knew where the wiring harnesses would need to be taken off, and you can see how greasy and dirty this one was. But this one, we took the transmission off and then lifted the engine itself out, and we didn't do both the engine and transmission at the same time. But once we had that out, we started cleaning up the engine bay real nice, and it took a lot of scrubbing. It was really dirty, caked and caked and caked with bad grease and everything like that. But after cleaning it and power washing it, you can see we cleaned it up pretty decent. So we were pretty excited about that. And so we're getting the new engine all in and set up and everything was going good. And of course, along the way, you hurt yourself, you cut yourself here and there, and that's why they say all the blood, sweat, and tears go into these cars. And here I am, a very much younger me, um, definitely trying to look at the wounds as I'm cleaning myself up at the end of each day. But anyway, we got back at it. We got a new pilot bearing and punched it into the crankshaft, since the other one was an automatic car, didn't have a pilot bearing. And looking at the old engine that we pulled apart, it was in horrible state. The oil pickup tube there, you could see, had shrapnel of all these parts and everything from losing the engine. And so that one, we looked at selling some of the parts, but there wasn't really much of a market for people looking for those parts. But we kept going with the parting out of the other car too, took the axle off, which I still have, never really sold that piece. But there's a lot of good parts on this car for $300. So we're just trying to make some of that money back. But this is when disaster struck. We started the car up and it started the very first try. And so we were totally excited, but then my brother said, hurry, shut it off because it's leaking underneath it. So we turned it off and we looked down and it looked like it had leaked out a whole bunch of power steering as soon as the engine started up. So we looked under there and we had bent one of the power steering lines, and I'll put a link in the description on my power steering install video, because there is a certain process you have to use to take it off without bending the line. And so anyway, the next morning I woke up early. We were just happy that the car, started up and ran. And I ran over and put the new power steering pump on it, one from the other car that we had that was good, didn't have any bent lines or anything. And so then we drove it up and down the street and it sounded fantastic. My brother took it down and I took it down, and we loved the 40 series with the H-pipe and new engine. What an accomplishment. So then my brother said, I'm going to take it one more time down the street. And so he took it down, and on his way back, all of a sudden it just shut off. And so he coasted it over, basically in front of the house. And we started looking at what was wrong. We thought maybe a battery connection came off or something, but we went to start it and it just clicked, kind of like what a dead battery would do. So we took the starter off and it wasn't the starter. We looked everything over and we just couldn't figure out why it had just shut off. Well, at this point is when I remembered about the power steering leak, and then my heart sank all the way down to my feet and I realized what I think had happened. So I got a breaker bar and put it on the crank, and sure enough, it was frozen solid. The engine had seized up. So what had happened is the oil filter was crushed on the donor engine as part of the accident, and so we put a new oil filter on. But what must have also happened is in the accident, it broke the oil filter adapter housing. So not only was the power steering being spewed out from the line, which it was, but we also had lost oil onto the ground at that same time. So we were just disgusted, thinking that we had just put this whole engine in, it started up, everything appeared to be working, and lo and behold, the engine had seized up. So now we had to start all over again. And so we decided to get back onto Craigslist, and we found another engine that was down in Las Vegas. So this was a Craigslist ad, and of course the guy says it runs, and I show up down there, and well, the engine is all there. He had at least duct taped off all of the ports where dirt could get in, but there wasn't even a hood on the car, so it was sun faded pretty bad, and it ended up being just the shell of a car with just the engine in it. So he said, I thought you were going to buy the whole car. And I said, well, there's no way I can even get it out of here. And he said, well, I'm being evicted. You have to get it out of here. And I said, well, here's the money. At least you can pay for a tow truck now. And he said, well, you're never going to get the engine out. And I said, well, watch us, because we've done this several times now. And he had an engine picker, so we brought it over there, and luckily it was just basically the motor mounts we had to undo and hook it up. But within 20 minutes we had that other engine lifted out and put into my friend's truck, and went to take it home. We stopped at a place and got some drinks as kind of a refreshment and kind of a celebration for getting it done. And while we were there in that same parking lot, we also saw a really cool Mustang GT, just like the one I used to own, which I did end up getting back just recently. And I'll put the link to that story in the description too, if you haven't seen that yet. But it was a really cool car to see down in Las Vegas. But anyway, it was time to get home and now pull out the engine we had just installed and start over again. So we got the old engine out and we looked at the parts that would be better off on one engine rather than the other, since the other one was so sun faded. We took the oil pan off and I dumped fresh oil right onto the crankshaft and up into the rods, and we turned the crankshaft to get everything lubricated back up. And like I said, moved over valve covers and the intake manifold and everything so we didn't have sun faded pieces in it. But other than that, the engine seemed like it was going to be okay. We went ahead and went to put it back in. Also, we took the oil pump off, or sorry, the water pump off, and flushed it real good too. But anyway, we went and put the engine back in. Everything was looking good, and we'd done this several times now, so it wasn't really too bad, other than just the chaos of having to do it over and over and over again. But we knew just how to hook everything up and shortcuts we could take this next time, and so everything went in just fine. And we hooked and plugged everything back in, and sure enough, this car as well, it had actually no problem starting. It started up right on the first try and drove around perfectly. So we were really excited about that. My little brother here, who's not so little anymore, was just turning 16, so we gave him the car. I sold the car to him, and I actually put the better axle that I had with 373s that was on my V6 so that he could have a little higher performance there, and just put his stock axle in my V6. But he enjoyed the car for quite a while. It cleaned up really nice. It still had some fading paint here and there, but for a first car for him, it was more than I had growing up with the V6. So he liked the car a lot, but he eventually did end up selling it to finance buying his first Camaro Z28, which he really liked after that. And so anyway, that's the story of this car, and thanks for watching. And I'll put a link in the description to our engine removal and install on the Cobra that we did, which is the same process. But anyway, thanks for watching, and make sure you subscribe.